Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murder. This is Jeff Jones, and with me today is the full panel. And we'll start at the top and say hello to Dr. Silkman. Dr. Silkman, how are you doing this morning? Did you get your morning coffee?
I certainly have, Jeff, and it's really good to be back on the panel to continue our series. Hi, everyone on the panel, and hi, everyone in chat. Great to be here.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Silkman. And Big Jeff, welcome back. Nice to see you. How are you doing today, this evening?
Hey, I'm doing great. It's hard to believe that it's been a whole week since the last one, but here we are again, ready to have at it. And I really am excited to finish out episode 1.
I didn't think we'd ever get there, Big Jeff. I didn't think we'd ever finish episode 1, but today we've
This
set our
time
minds
for sure.
We're going to get there. So, Kel, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you for having me back. I can't believe it's been a week already. Let's get started. I'm eager to finish this episode.
Thanks, Kel. And Wilfred Brimley has joined us. Hey, Jack, how's it going over there? Nice to actually see you. I like your backdrop there. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Hello, everybody. I'm here in panel, live chat. Thanks for coming. And really interesting discussion we just had about the blood, and looking forward to the next. Let's do it.
We've got a mannequin that's the same height as Teresa Halbach, same weight. We put weights on her, 135 pounds. And we've got human hair, the same length as Teresa Halbach's hair. So the state claimed that Teresa Halbach was shot twice in the head, so we have blood on the hair in that area, in the occipital and parietal, so the side and the back of her head.
Yeah. I don't know if that's enough that's going to be able to
Let's do
come
more.
off there.
We'll do more. I wanted to reenact it. I wanted to understand it. So we got a mannequin, got the blood from a lab, and then brought Stuart James in to try to recreate the blood on the rear cargo door. Yeah, interesting. That's right where that, yeah, you got her in the right spot. Do you see anything, Stuart? I don't see any blood at all that hit the white sheet.
No, he was kind of blocking it.
Yeah.
I can tell you it's a lot heavier than it looks.
So this time, why don't we interject Scott into it with you? So if we had one of you on each side, just fling her like he's talking about.
Well, I think they have to sling her a little sooner to get the blood to come off on the.
Okay. I think you ought to turn her sideways like this.
You have to put some more blood on
and
her
turn
too.
her like that. Yeah. Okay. Let's bring more blood. We can dump all the rest of the blood in the hair.
1, 2, 3. There's no way you could throw a body that heavy and generate enough velocity.
Which is what he was saying happens.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, why don't we just, as an experiment, take all the weight off of her? You're slinging her exactly where she was, and it isn't working. So
There's some there.
With that kind of weight, he was able to do it, but with a heavier weight, it would still require the same acceleration,
it would, yeah,
which is not very likely.
right. So even with taking all the weight off, so she weighs like 20 or 25 pounds, and then standing here and swinging it back and forth, we're not creating the pattern that was actually on the RAV4 when they discovered the car. Now we've got what you were describing to me before, this elongated
So
pattern.
the stains that were deposited with a directionality of going from right to left.
My approach on all of the post-conviction cases that I've worked on over the years is that I have to do two things simultaneously. I have to first take apart the state's entire case But at the same time, I want to figure out exactly what happened. I'm actually driven more by the desire to know what happened, because once I figure out what happened, then the state's case collapses. Both things have to be done, because most courts are not going to vacate a murder conviction. Most courts want to know, what are you saying happened? You know, I mean, if you're so bold that you're taking apart the state's whole case, particularly in a case like this, where such enormous effort was spent to convict Stephen Avery.
If I could make a comment on what she just said, I bet that's sometimes there's comments that don't age well, and I think that's one of them, because it's actually not the defense's job to necessarily put forward the exact narrative. It is the defense's job to prove reasonable doubt by dismantling. It doesn't matter what my narrative is. The way that you said it couldn't possibly have happened, and this scene that we just saw, that really took apart the way that 10 Kratz assumed that where that blood stain in the back of the raft came from, is a perfect example of what's going to instill reasonable doubt in the jury. And like we've said before on this panel, if you look at the current motion that's before the court, because this motion that contains this evidence has been denied, right? So this is it's interesting from the historical perspective, but it's water under the bridge that has come and gone. The state does not really consider what we just saw evidence per se. But if you look at the current motion, which I've said ought to have been titled Bobby the Denny, I don't believe that Zellner thinks half. I don't think that Zellner even believes that half of it's true. But it's about making sure that Stephen Avery gets that evidentiary hearing and perhaps a new trial, because she's going to show, and through her articulation in that briefing, that Bobby meets all the prongs of Denny, whether she believes it or not that he actually did any of that stuff. It's a logical argument. It's a strategic argument aimed at getting this evidentiary hearing, leading to a new trial, because Stephen was denied his constitutional rights, right? Which is far different from the high road she's taking in that in this episode, which is, I can dismantle the state's case, which she has, and prove to the world that doesn't make any sense, which she did, judging by the response demand. But now we're in a much different place in this case, and she's had to go down this road, which is unfortunate. She had to go down it, because I think she made a lot of great points in her previous brief. But here we are.
I have a hard time believing that that's the only way you could get a body in, is the way that those two guys are attempting to get it into this back of this RAV. And we had a discussion last episode about experimenting and how it can sometimes yield positive results, and sometimes it can yield negative results. And just the way that they're saying it, like, it's impossible, you couldn't do it. And I'm thinking in my head, I don't know, I think I might be able to. I just wouldn't be, I would be going about it in a different way, picking a body up like a sack of potatoes from the waist and with two arms, and I don't know. So it seems like there's so much room for interpretation, and that's the danger of these experiments. And are they fruitful? Absolutely, they can be fruitful, but I just think we need to just keep our eye on the ball with them. That's it. You just need to have an open mind and try to create experiments that aren't going to have as many variables as possible. So that's just the only comment that I wanted to make about the beginning section.
Yeah, just one final comment before we move on. And thinking about how that they were trying to manhandle, what did Teresa weigh? 125, 130, trying to sling her into the back of that RAV and reproduce what was on that back door. Because Kratz didn't really want to talk about that inside of that cargo door, and it really wasn't talked about too much at trial. But trying to reproduce that action, and man. Like what'd you say there, Jeff? Like a sack of potatoes?
Well, that's why, Jack, I rail against the blood expert's comment from the state that, said this is consistent with this happening. And I think what Zellner just tried to show there was that it's not only is it not consistent, where we've indicated that consistent is not a very strong word, that nobody could even think of a way to do it. Now, I'd like to hear, somebody who has a different idea of how you could put a body in the back and make that blood stain the way it is, because I can't think of it. The other thing that I can't think of, which is utterly ridiculous, is why Stephen and Brendan would have put the body in there in the first place, and then decided to take it out, because that doesn't make any sense to me. Period. So that part of the narrative is baloney.
Yeah, we've talked about many times about this. Most of these RAVs come with a cargo mat, and that one's gone. And clearly, to me, there had to be something in the back of that RAV. If she was bleeding from the head, like we suspect she probably was, there would have been blood all over the back of that cargo carpet area, and it wasn't.
And I remember when Fassbender and Wiegert were questioning Brendan about what they did with Teresa, because they obviously knew that Teresa was in the back of her own RAV4 due to the blood on that plastic panel near the wheel well. Brendan actually said that they put her in the RAV4 and then shot her in the head in the RAV4, right? And Fassbender and Wiegert had to correct Brendan and said, no, that's not what you did. And then Brendan came up with another scenario. Oh, that's right. We shot her outside of the RAV4, then we put her into the RAV4, and then we decided to take her out of the RAV4 and then put her into the fire pit. So quite clearly, the scenarios that Brendan was coming up with was clearly ludicrous.
So we're looking at the rear cargo door of Teresa Halbach's vehicle. How would you describe this blood stain pattern?
It would fall into the classification of a cast-off pattern, which means, by definition, that wet blood has been flung from an object.
Is there any way that you can determine from the pattern on the vehicle where they were positioned when they made that movement that caused the pattern?
Well, again, you go back and look at the shape of the stain and the distribution. In this particular instance, the stains are essentially near circular, which means that they've come in almost in a, if you will, a horizontal perspective, okay? And the source of blood was close enough to, it overcame the parabolic arcing of the blood, so it still impacted at almost 90 degrees. And the swing has got to be horizontal here, because if the person or the object wet with blood was higher than the actual bottom portion of that hatchback, the blood would have had a downward trajectory. You would see tails at the front edge of the stains. So an area of origin would be, in this case, I would probably give it, 12 to 15 inches either way. I mean, not on the floor, but 12, 15, maybe 20 inches above, because
ground
6 inches is not going to make a big difference in the shape of the stains. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's not an acute enough angle. So
yeah,
somewhere between, kneeling and or further down.
Okay, so then let's talk about, I've got various weapons on the table, or what could be weapons on the table. If the victim were, say, kneeling in front of that cargo door, the cargo door were open, and I shot the victim in the head.
Well, gunshots, you have the potential of a forward spatter and a back spatter of 1 millimeter or less. And
So
these are clearly, I would say, estimate 2.5 millimeters wide, which in the absence of other misting pattern of very small stains, it is simply not representative of a pattern produced by gunshot. But I could probably create a similar pattern with all three of these.
All three of them.
Depending upon where I put the blood,
yes,
et cetera. I mean, for one thing, I think we can rule out the tip of a knife, but when you start getting into other blunt objects, it's very difficult.
Right.
But what we're seeing here that we're definitive about is that it is a cast-off pattern, and the source of the blood, the area of origin, if you will, was in front of that door, a couple, 2 to 3 feet away, but also near the, at the back of the vehicle with the hatch door open.
Okay, it's just a sling back.
You can use a different paper. Don't hit that one again. And then put a mark on here, number 1.
Yeah.
I get this feeling that that sometimes the blood splatter, the way I look at it, they keep doing this. They've done it a few times, and it does seem like it could be more than one pull at the hammer. A few. Somebody's doing it a few times. That's the only thing I could take from this. It's a interesting experiment that they're working on here.
You do get the impression though, as they're going through this experiment, that they really are on the hunt for the truth, right? This expert that probably doesn't even have any idea what may or may not inculpate or exculpate Stephen Avery at all. He's just saying that this is how I think it happened, and just the fact that upon his first inspection of it, he totally dismantles Ken Krat's story is, it's just very impressive, and gets your blood boiling with regard to the bullshit that they managed to pull off in the first trial.
If you're going to try and reproduce a murder scenario, you need to do exactly what Kathleen Zellner did, right? Now, you got to understand, Kathleen Zellner and her experts don't know the outcome of those experiments, right? So if the outcome proved that Stephen was guilty, she would have said so. But quite clearly, her experiments, the way she's done them, right? Straight off the bat, on video, not edited, had no influence on the outcome, showed conclusively that what the state said occurred to Teresa Halbach was incorrect. It now opens up a whole lot of scenarios that Teresa Halbach was indeed surprised and attacked at the back of her own RAV4, which now opens the question, 1, why did she get out of the RAV4? 2, what about the blinker light, the broken blinker light? Had that something to do with the reason why Teresa got out of her own RAV4? And 3, who attacked her at the back of her own RAV4?
Well, you talk about, this, they're doing these mock experiments to try to, really show how these stains, these blood spots ended up on that cargo door. But then we think about the blunt and bloody instrument found in the RAV as reported by Harrington. And that puts a pretty fine point on it. And I'm going to dare say that when these were made, Kathleen she had not seen this unfiled warrant. No one had. Makes sense to me.
That's matching pretty close. Experimentation in the case is extremely important because you can test the theories of what you think happened. It's like if you could go to a crime scene when it was fresh and you could redo the whole thing. That's what I'm doing. I'm recreating it. Just experiment with it. Because once we get it, it's gonna, I think, be consistent. Yeah. Okay, so let me put quite a bit on there. Yeah. One thing I'm 100% sure of, it did not occur the way Mr. Kratz told the jury it occurred. It's demonstrably false what he told them. And I intend to do that on each piece of evidence that he presented to the jury. Because this case, more than anything, more than a case of ineffective assistance of counsel, is a case of gross, extreme, egregious prosecutorial misconduct. And so that will be a real pleasure, like unmasking Mr. Kratz.
The interesting thing is that I just wanted to say, I just want to echo what Kathleen was really going on about there. Although we know that she's doing experiments, she summed it up. She said, listen, basically all I'm trying to show is that Ken Kratz's narrative wasn't right. I'm giving alternatives to what could have happened. If I can dismantle the state's theory, then I can create reasonable doubt. And I think that's what it's coming down to. Yes, she's recreating alternative narratives, but she doesn't even know what's real and what's not. We don't know what happened and what variables and what led Teresa to be in positions that she was in, like Dr. Silkman said before. Who made her get out of the RAB? What made her get out of the RAB? Why did she go to the back of the RAB? Was it an accident? No one knows these fine details. But if you can just capture the things that matter, and that is creating an alternative to say, hey, this could have happened additional to what the state presented, then I think that is bigger than the experiment itself. And I think that, and Kathleen just summed it up for us by saying that. I don't have to prove how it happened. I just have to show that it could have happened another way.
I just want to point out right now, like, what is on the screen, because I think it's important for us to look at just a list of people who did not want to be involved in MAM, and we just happened to stop on it. So I thought I'd make a point of it, and just to take a look at the people who maybe just didn't want to make statements, and see if that helps you guys any in the future. But for this episode, I think we're just moving into these experimental things, and we're really getting into a cool conversation. So let's just pop right over. Jack, did you have something to add?
Just briefly,
Yeah.
just looking at this list, and I've looked at it before, but Doc, Cal, Big Jeff, I see Nasty Disgrace's name is on there. I can't believe she didn't want to be on film. She's never met a camera she didn't like. There's some other ones in here too.
Wow, I didn't. I never looked at this list very hard until right now, and it's interesting to see some of these names. But I am surprised about Nancy Disgrace.
Yeah.
There's been some discussion about the Don Plizka call. See, her name's on here. A few others that are quite interesting as well. But Carl Wardman, he didn't want to be on film.
I have to say, though, as much as I hate to say this, Bobby Dassey's on it, and he's the only Dassey/Avery that doesn't want to say anything. That's a little bit. I never noticed that before, that he's the only family member that doesn't want to have anything to do with this. But in hindsight, well, no, he wouldn't have even known at that stage, would he have? Like, what stage when Making a Murderer 2 had come out, was he aware that Kathleen was making him a Denny? What's the order of that? Do we know? Or would he
that would have been
figured that out as it kind of went along?
That would have been late September, October 2017, I think, is the date. I'm also putting together, because we don't have them in the playlist for ease of access, some of the earlier phone calls. And I don't want to get off track here, guys, but the call between Stephen Barbin and Scott Paddock, oh my God, I'd forgotten about that. And everything that was said, it's just insane going back and re-listening to that at this point.
Unless anybody has any statements to make on the last part of this episode, we'll just roll right into episode 2 and on to the next, right, Big Jeff?
On to the next, baby.
As our first witness, the defense calls Kenneth Kratz.
For the testimony shall be the matter
Mr. Kratz, at the time that you made a decision to charge Mr. Avery with the homicide in this case, you did not know exactly what had happened to Teresa Hallback prior to the time that her body had been burned, correct?
I think that's fair.
Okay. And at the time that you filed criminal charges against Stephen Avery for the murder of Teresa Hallback, you did not have sufficient evidence to support sexual assault charges against Mr. Avery, correct?
That's true.
Okay. And so would it be fair to say that you did not get a narrative of Teresa Hallback's final hours, if you will, until Brendan Dassey gave a statement on March 1st?
That was the first individual who was involved in the criminal enterprise to give me a narrative of what had happened. Narrative, can be provided by crime lab personnel, and here's what the physical evidence suggests, and this came first.
But prior to the time,
hang on here, one at a time. Finish your answer.
Right. I had received a narrative in that respect from the forensic scientists that were involved.
you had some evidence, you were getting some reports from various crime lab people, but there were significant gaps in the narrative that were filled in only when Brendan Dassey's statement was presented to you.
I think that's fair.
It goes to show that the state had no idea where and how Teresa Hallback got murdered, right? They had no idea. Think about it. From the crime scene lab perspective, they went into Stephen's trailer, found nothing. Later, the key shows up. That doesn't indicate how Teresa got murdered. They go into the garage. They found nothing, right? Until months later, they find Ida Maffel. But the first time the CSI team went in there, they found no indication of how Teresa Hallback got murdered. So hence, the only thing that they had was the RAV4 with the blood and the cremains in the burn pit. And from there, they had to somehow come up with a scenario of how Teresa Hallback had met her demise. Now, it takes a lot of gall for Ken Kratz to say, yeah, we got our narrative from the crime scene forensic evidence. That's bullshit. It does not indicate where Teresa Hallback got murdered, how Teresa Hallback got murdered, and most importantly, that she got murdered by the hands of Stephen Avery.
First of all, the nerve of that son of a bitch to call this a criminal enterprise. What the hell is he talking about? Criminal enterprise? That's like the mafia. It's like Don Corleone is a criminal enterprise. You know, that is the most outrageous. It speaks to the stupid writing in his book. You know what I mean? He can't come up with a phrase in real time. My ass. With regard to what Dr. Silkman just said, they not only had no narrative, but they had to make stuff up. As I recall, searching through those pictures of the RAV, I didn't see one pool of blood in the RAV4. We've looked. Have we seen any? But yet that was in his press conference post. You know, after finding the RAV. So not only did they have nothing, they had to lie about what they had. So that's the story of that initial part of the case, and it was so bad they needed Brendan at that point because people in town weren't buying Kratz's shit. They needed something else, and that's why they went after Brendan.
That's exactly right, and we've talked about it before. I'm sure it'll come up again. Stephen's trial is completely different without Brendan. They had to have Brendan to make that link, and Kratz knew it. But again, this son of a bitch to get up here in 2010, think about, I just mentioned it, the unfiled search warrant. I'm sure that he knew about this. I'm sure of it. And how did that all get controlled? Because there's so much communication about the RAV and who was there and everything that they did at the crime lab. There's so much stuff that's not documented by anyone. As far as I know, there was no. This is just me talking. There should have been someone from Calumet or from the DCI there to document, even if it was just a video documentation of what they were doing to that RAV as they went through it, because it's such an important part of the case, because they built everything around that RAV. And of course, then they have Brendan come in. That's another something else that I went through the other night, how all of this magnified after the statement, and the statement after Kratz makes the charges, and he goes back to court to have more shit added onto Avery's record. His bond gets pumped up from $500,000 to $750,000. So, man, this guy, I can't. I just.
And then none of those charges were actually used, right? They all got thrown out.
That's right. That's right. This guy, to how he can justify his place in the criminal justice system, especially in these cases. I don't know. I can't really comment too much about other cases he was in, but these cases, man, it's so bad. It's so terrible.
Mr. Kratz, in order to convict Stephen Avery of first-degree murder, did you need the testimony of Brendan Dassey to do that?
No, it wasn't offered at Stephen Avery's trial.
It's absolute garbage, because they used Brendan for almost a year everywhere. And then suddenly, right before trial, boom, we're going to try them separately. They're not really co-defendants. It's a separate thing. It's the same person that got killed, but we're going to do this separately. Absolute, again, this is two high-powered lawyers, at least, well, one's for sure, but Kratz has been doing it a long time and gone. They're taking the system and screwing it. That's exactly what they did.
Bloody Kratz did that narrative on March the 2nd, I think, the press conference. He used Brendan Dassey's narrative without fact-checking. So the damage was done. And then, like a toy, they threw Brendan Dassey out and they tried him separately. And this is amazing, as Jack alluded to. You've got one victim and two different murder scenarios on the same victim. And they thought ethically it was fine. And what really, really annoys me is bloody Fallon. How he was like a snake and said, we don't need Brendan Dassey. We don't need his testimony. We tried Stephen separately. Yet, look how aggressively they went after Brendan during his trial. And the only thing against Brendan was his words. Not one piece of forensic evidence against Brendan, and that kid's in prison for life.
Would it be fair to say that the only benefit to Mr. Dassey's testimony would have been to support the charges of sexual assault, kidnapping, and false imprisonment?
No, I think there were side benefits. If we felt less comfortable trying this case from a forensic science standpoint rather than a statement of witnesses or co-defendant statement, that certainly would have had a collateral benefit. Having said that, as you and probably everybody now knows, we chose to try the Avery case very much as a circumstantial forensic science case.
And now, sorry, Jack, I'm almost going to smash my iPad here. And now you understand the power of planting. And they knew they knew that they had to make sure that the conviction against Stephen was rock solid, because he just told you we didn't use Brendan Dassey. So hence, if you're going to plant, you want to make sure you do it well and that it's strong and that it's robust, because they knew they didn't, if there was any weakness in their arguments, then Stephen would have walked. So now you understand the multi-layered approach of doing planting. And this is scary, guys, because to me, it indicates that they had plan B, and that is someone in the crime lab who would be complicit in making sure that Stephen got convicted.
So as the credits run a little bit there, guys, just throw out your impressions so far, where we're at in the journey.
Hearing Kratz say that Stephen was tried on largely circumstantial evidence, really, sort of sets the stage for, tearing down the narrative that he's been blowing out of his ass for the last 10 years, right? I mean, he saw we got this mountain of evidence. What is it? Is it a mountain of evidence or is it a circumstantial case? Which is it? Because the word circumstantial has a very direct meaning. So when he's on the stand under oath, largely circumstantial case based on forensic evidence. But when he's running his mouth on Twitter or on interviews, we had a mountain of evidence. So which is it? Which is it?
Well, I think he made many statements that we've talked about during his press conference that were absolutely untrue, and he was questioned on it, and he ignored it. He says they had all this evidence, that basically came from Brendan. It was a lie. Even during that second search on March, when they went over on March 1st and 2nd to search the garage again, they made this big production that there was a foot of snow on the ground, so nobody could have found this shell fragment, this item FL, out there in the yard somewhere. It's such bullshit. But they used Brendan, and he's again here on the stand in 2010 and during this hearing, he's ignoring the fact of what the media did and what he did. And then, of course, when Judge Fallon shut them up, Mike Halbach did for them.
Morning. Good to see you. Why don't you just have a seat, Brendan? Tom and I just gotta stop out for a minute, and then we'll be right in, okay? Okay. All right.
Stephen Avery's attorneys face a different task than us. The case against Stephen Avery is a case that's built on forensics, on blood evidence, on things like that.
Soda, water, you sure?
Well, water maybe.
Okay.
The case against Brendan Dassey, there's no scientific evidence pinning him to this crime. The case against Brendan Dassey is words and words only. Why would someone falsely confess to a crime that they didn't commit, especially one as horrific as this crime? The reality is that the work of organizations like the Center on Wrongful Convictions and the Innocence Project have uncovered hundreds of proven false confessions. In fact, in murder cases, homicide cases like Ms. Halbach's case, we know that false confessions are actually the most common cause of wrongful convictions.
I just wanted to just go over this real quick again. Do you remember these rights, your Miranda rights that I read you? Yeah. You still want to talk to us? Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to make sure of that.
If you believe that your client has falsely confessed on videotape, it's not enough to simply argue that. You have to embrace that tape. You have to accept that tape as the best proof of your client's innocence.
We want to talk today about the 3 errors that occur during police investigation that can cause false confessions to happen. The first one is the misclassification error. Officers making wrong assumptions about whether somebody is lying and therefore guilty. Police are trained to watch the ways in which people answer questions, to read their body language, to notice their choice of words. This is what's referred to as behavioral analysis, and that all it takes is proper training for a police officer to turn into a human lie detector.
Be honest, because we're gonna be able to tell when you're not being honest. I'm telling you that right now. So
this is a handout that is used by a company called John E. Reed and Associates. They developed the most widely used interrogation technique in the country. This is the slide of characteristics that are supposed to be shown by people who are lying. Let's look. It says slouched. Here's a screenshot of Brendan's interrogation. He's slouched. Hand over mouth or eyes, sure enough. Rigid and immobile. And, as for these verbal things, somebody who says, I don't know, must be lying. Let me tell you, if there's one thing that Brendan Dassey said hundreds of times during that interrogation, it's, I don't know.
His ability to interact with other people is limited. But of course, it feeds right into these false narratives that officers are trained in. Somebody who can't make eye contact, it must mean they're lying. It must mean they're guilty.
This failure to look people in the eye, this withdrawing during social situations. This is his disability. And I think it also is the misclassification error. Then there's the coercion error. Once you get that wrong person in the interrogation room, how are they convinced to say something so dramatically against their self-interest?
How did she get in the back of the Jeep? Tell us that.
Oh.
Did you help him?
No.
Let's be
At the beginning of an interrogation, an innocent person's confidence that they will emerge from the interrogation process unharmed is sky high. But the goal of interrogation is to bring that confidence level down.
We've been investigating this a long time. We pretty much know everything. We already know what happened. We already know what happened. We already know. Remember, we already know. We already know. We already know. We know. We already know. You know we know. We know. We know you were back there. We know what happened. It's okay.
False.
What a great job they did with the editing to demonstrate the flicker of we already know.
We already know.
Oh, take it away.
They should do
guys.
another one where it'll be okay. It'll be okay. We just, but one thing I just wanted to mention was we're actually seeing right now, paying attention to the news, that state after state is making it not legal for police to lie during juvenile confession. And boy, is that a change for the positive. Because just imagine how many, I'll pull the panel, how many we already know is that they say in that little, that was, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, all lies. Those are all lies, right? That's what they are.
I think somebody, Big Jeff, did a count. I think Wiegert and Fassbender said it 125 times. I already know. We know. So, for someone like Brendan, that really confused him because he's telling one story and they're telling him you're lying and we already know, which makes Brendan very uneasy, thinking, my God, what the hell's going on? And we have to look no further than what happened to him on November the 6th at Crivets. Right, guys? When he told
exactly
O'Neill,
right.
When he told O'Neill, hey, look, me and my brother came off the bus, 3:45. We walked down the gravel road. We went in our trailer, and that was it. I later went over to Stevens. He gave me a phone call. And they consistently told him, no, you're lying. You're holding back. And then Skorlinski grabs O'Neill and tells him about the bus driver, Lisa Buchner. That completely shocked Brendan because he's thinking, wait a minute, our bus driver saw a photographer taking pictures and O'Neill just said, hey, everybody on the bus saw that photographer. So then Brendan changed his story twice. And that was it. That showed you how malleable that young kid was. He was able to change and adapt to what the detective was telling him. That, unfortunately, was to his detriment.
I think also to add to what you were talking about earlier about the count, I think that was Edelston, it may have been Primgen, when he was had Wiegert under cross. He asked him if he knew how many times that him and Wiegert and Fassbender had called Brendan a liar. And, I don't know. It was at at least in one section, it was 75 times in one interview. Told him he was a liar. I think that's right.
The one that I've been on about on Twitter recently is Fassbender telling Brendan that he was a liar when he said that she was shot at, that they shot her outside. I realize it's legal for them to lie, but what evidence did he have of why wasn't that believable to Fassbender? And it's exactly what Jack was getting at before, which was they needed to make that March 1st and 2nd search so they could miraculously discover NMFL and the hood latch swab as well. So they came out of that with two pieces of great forensic evidence that are both bullshit.
Two man miracles.
That's right.
The disturbing thing here, guys, is that the crack CSI unit and all the searchers and all the investigators, despite going into the garage, despite going into the RAV, they never got a hood latch swab prior to Brendan. They never found item FL prior to Brendan. And guys, think about it. They needed to close the story. They needed to make the narrative real. So what's the best way to close the narrative? Big Jeff, you have two man miracles. The hood latch swab, which was talked about by Fassbender. Brendan never mentioned Stephen going under the hood, but Fassbender did. Then Brendan agreed. And who shot her in the head, Brendan? Straight from Uyghur. Brendan never mentioned the shooting scenario. If you're a young kid and there's a gun going off next to your head 10 times, you're never going to forget it. You're never going to forget seeing someone shot in the skull with blood pouring out. You're never going to forget it. Yet Brendan never mentions Stephen going under the hood. Brendan never mentions a shooting scenario. And look at this. After they have their so-called confession, two-man miracle occurs. The finding of item FL, right? And the hood latch swab, which means that they have got credence to what Brendan is telling them. Yet, everything else that Brendan said, like hiding the knife, hiding the gun, and other things, all turned out to be false.
Isn't it just, it's so easy to see what Brendan is doing, right? I mean, we know what he's like. He'll make up a narrative to get people to get out of his face, right? He'll say anything that he needs to. And with Fassbender and Uyghur continually saying, we know, and it'll be okay. You can tell us, it'll be okay, right? He must be thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do to get these guys out of my face? And that is, I'm getting the sense of what they want me to do is throw Stephen under the bus. But it's going to be okay for me because that's what they're telling me. So yeah, okay, whatever you want me to say about Stephen, I'll say. I just need to get out of here because look how uncomfortable I am. I'm all closed up. I can't stand the fact of what they're doing to me. I really don't think he was capable of understanding exactly what he was confessing to, as evidenced by the fact at the end. He said, "Oh yeah, can I go back to school now? I just confessed to rape and murder."
That's exact. Have you ever heard of someone raping, murdering, mutilating, cremating an unknown woman, and then saying to the investigators, do you reckon I'll be able to get to school back in time? I've got a project I've got to hand in. It's completely ridiculous, guys.
We're taking you to jail for one day.
Yeah, for one day. And to add to what you're saying, Big Jeff, is that this is what the 5th time that he's been wrapped up with one officer or another. Started with O'Neill, and then moved on into after Kayla makes this statement. Again, I don't want to get off into another area of the origination of that. I got my own feelings and opinion about it, but this is like the 5th time he's been wrapped up, and now it's really getting serious. He's in this, and they're really on him now. Look how close in this one photo here. Uyghur's right there. He's almost ready to touch his knee. It's just completely ridiculous.
One of the things that I kind of noticed on this pass through is that, he's not sitting across at a table with Brendan. Oh no, let's get him a soda and put him on a couch. real casual like, right? And try to put him at ease. And it's definitely done on purpose there. And I hearken back to the story that they made him say about, oh yeah, after you raped Teresa Halbach, what did you do? Oh, Steven sat me down and we had a soda. That's not what Steven does. It's what Mark Wiegert. That's his MO. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's where that part of the story came from, because that's what they did with Brendan. They sat him down and they gave him a soda, right? Plopped him on the couch and let's talk like we're just boys, So, yeah, that technique, maybe there needs to be standardization about how these are conducted. They're
Absolutely.
just crazy.
Yeah, 100% correct.
It was a psychological war here that, he was ill-equipped to fight. There's absolutely no way. He's got 2 seasoned detectives in there that have been around and around with, probably people from every stripe, low to high, male, female, lies. Kids that lie, they're constantly in trouble, and they will lie really well to get out of it. So, and I'm sure they had their marching orders when they went into this to begin with. I'm sure they did. I'm 100% convinced of it.
And 100% agree, Jack. And what's ridiculous and remarkable at the same time is that the Brendan Dassey interrogation sessions are used by lawyers, professors, academics on how not to conduct an interrogation.
And police.
Yes. Yeah, it's used as a model example of what not to do. The most disgusting thing ever is that Fassbender and Wiegert would never admit to any wrongdoing. Why? Because the law is on their side. They did precisely what the manual, the Reed Technique manual, told them to do. So their conscience is clear.
Evidence ploys, telling the suspect over and over again, we already know. John E. Reed and Associates cautions police officers, deceptive tactics should not ordinarily be used with individuals who have significant mental limitations or with youthful suspects of low social maturity.
You were there when she died, we know that. Come on.
What he made you do, Brendan, we know he made you do something else.
Little tap. Come on, buddy.
We have the evidence, Brendan.
He says there's all this evidence against me. He's not believing me. What am I going to do? This is a serious problem. What am I going to do? And that's when interrogators are trained to give a suspect an out.
He made you do something to her, didn't he? So he would feel better about not being the only person, right? Yeah. What do you make you do to her?
Did you want to participate in the rape, or did your uncle force you? The suggestion is, if you accept the less heinous version, that you will be treated more leniently.
From what I'm seeing, even if I fill those in, I'm thinking you're all right. Okay, you don't have to worry about things.
Honesty here, Brendan, is the thing that's going to help you. Okay, no matter what you did, we can work through that. Because the honest person is the one that's going to get a better deal out of everything. Honesty is the only thing that'll set you free.
I'm sorry. I have to interject. He's lying. Look at his hand. Perfect stop. Perfect. Look at this son of a bitch. I'm your friend. I'm your pal. Looking through this stuff, I think you're going to be all right. What?
Brendan. And it's remarkable, right? Because we've gone through the interview many, many times. And Fassbender goes to Brendan right at the end. Well, we're cops. What do you think we're going to do? And they arrest him, of course. So they lead him down this garden path, tell him all this bullshit that, don't worry about it. You're going to be okay. Everything's going to look really favorable for you. And then they hit him with the kitchen sink because they've got their confession. They've got it Mirandaized. They've got it written down. They've got it recorded. That's all they need. And then they drop the hammer on Brendan like a ton of bricks. Boom, gone.
And then they work with, this real snake, Kaczynski. Kaczynski miraculously hires, some troll from God knows where, O'Kelly, And they get involved and entangled, and they continue to work with them for the next 4 months and absolutely destroy this kid's case. Destroyed it. And they're okay with that because their goal was to jail Avery. Brendan's he's collateral damage, and they all know it.
You said the right word, collateral damage, because it wasn't Brendan that had the $36 million lawsuit. It was Stephen. So unfortunately, Brendan was used as a chess piece in order to get to Stephen.
I know this is said before and it's a little bit off task of what you guys were just saying, but the fact that people all around the world are using this interview as a prime example of what not to do in interrogations kind of sums up this entire confession. If you're teaching lectures all over the world and you're teaching, officers, training officers, what not to do in an interrogation and using this as the example, come on now. Come on.
Like, how does a court not take that into consideration? You know what I'm saying? Like, no, this is the new standard, judge. Oh, never mind. Never mind you.
But guys, we all know what the issue is here. And that is, it will set a precedence. So we all know what Judge Duffin came up with, right? And we'll discuss it later. So you think how many youths or individuals like Brendan there have been, not only in Wisconsin, but all around the United States, right? So if you come up with a judgment that says, hey, this type of questioning, especially to someone as young and as vulnerable and as someone who doesn't have an adult or attorney present right next to them, is vulnerable to coercion. Could you imagine how many potential people who are in prison through words and words only are going to now put up their hand and say, I want my case re-examined, right? It could be potentially hundreds. It could be potentially thousands, right? So you don't want to set a precedence.
Just a question. This is honestly a question versus a statement or a comment from me. Do you guys think, and obviously the chat, do you think that's a problem that we are going to see though? You just highlighted a really, really significant point. You set a standard that you don't want to start making it something that you can compare cases to, where there's all these people stand up and go, hey, listen, I was young, I wrongfully confessed, and it sets that standard. So is that a fear that we're going to probably see with the Stephen Avery case? That's something that is possibly going to block his standards of moving forward as well. How I'm trying to say it is the fact that if Stephen gets an evidentiary hearing or a new trial or an exoneration based off like the Denny claim, and I get it that he had a constitutional right to have Denny, and I get all that, but this is beyond that now because we're not doing Denny in trial, we're doing it post-conviction. Is that why we might see them try to lock down a lot harder, because you don't want to set that all these people will start saying, hey, there's evidence against me. Yeah, it might be circumstantial, but Stephen Avery got out on a technicality of Denny, and I want to accuse my next door neighbor now. So do you see what I'm trying to say?
I understand. I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is going to be, Dr. Silkman said it, like you don't want to set an example and then have all these people go, hang on, hello, I want to be heard now. And I fear that's the case with maybe this is what the courts will look at with Denny and Stephen Avery's case. You don't want them to be going, every single person who's ever had evidence against them in a trial now can come up and say, hey, I want to cite Stephen Avery's case where my next door neighbor, or my husband, my wife got stabbed to death, but I got accused of it because my DNA was at the scene, my fingerprints was on the knife, but she had a problem with the next door neighbor and he could have been a good Denny. So that's the thing. Like, that's where I fear, and I've said it. That's where they're going to lock down, because they don't want to set Stephen Avery again as the example, that people could cite his case on all the wrong that can happen. So again, this isn't a comment from me. This is a question to you guys. If you guys clearly understood what I was trying to say, do you think this could be a reason why the courts will get even harder in making decisions to favor Stephen? Because if they do, it opens up such a big can of worms for all the other people out there that might fall in the same catchment.
Yeah, the answer to that is I don't think so, because typically what happens in the law, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, is that judges tend to make it easier. Right? There was a ruling regarding Brady that Zelna thought might help her on her previous motion.
Civil claim.
That actually relieved the burden of, sort of the burden of asking from the defense, and put it onto the prosecution more and more. Sort of in principle, my opinion is it's exactly the wrong way to go. I mean, people need to give people rights, and those rights need to be respected. And it's better to let 10 guilty people go than convict and imprison one innocent person, because your life and your liberty is just too precious of a thing. Train the cops to follow the goddamn rules, and if they don't follow them, then people are going to walk. I'm sorry, that's how it has to happen. So
and hold those people, and hold those people accountable that break that the hard and fast rules from the law enforcement side of it. If you break it, you're going to jail, and you're going to jail for 10 years, whatever, done deal. And you're not going to get a job back in law enforcement under any capacity whatsoever. Until that happens, we're going to continue to see these issues. I get what Kel's saying though, but there's so many protections already built in. EDTA is one of them. It's so, the pendulum is so far the other way now for the state. The federal system has really a really narrow window now to be able to affect a state court's decision. It's really narrow, and they really respect it. We saw it in Brendan's case. They went leaps and bounds the other direction and cherry picked various things from his all these stories that were told, and said, "No, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. His conviction stands." So I understand what you're saying, and I get it. And you don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry saying, "Hey, my brother."
Frivolous, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's if it's frivolous, that's one thing. And saying, "Oh yeah, my neighbor's now a Denny," you still have to meet the prongs of Denny.
Correct.
Or get somebody to perhaps perjure themselves, and in a parallel case, if the Sawinski equivalent in this parallel case is perjuring themselves, you don't want to do that. But let's also remember that Stephen is not going to get set free because of this. There'll be an evidentiary hearing, and the state will have the option to either set him free because of this constitutional violation. There's no way on this earth they're going to do that. They're going to retry him, right? Yeah. That will be the case. So just because you can raise your neighbor to a Denny doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get out. If it's frivolous, it may place a large extra burden on the courts to have to do a lot of retrying. So they will try and avoid frivolity, but you have to make sure that people get their rights and that those rights are obeyed, or else you're into some type of third world banana republic, right? Don't go down that road.
Another aspect of this, Big Jeff, that everybody on the panel, that we kind of talk about it, but this is kind of the quiet elephant in the room. When you think about these statements that Fassbender and Wiegert elicited from Brendan, and these extra charges were made, Stephen was never allowed to confront that. Never. Not under any circumstances in trial. So it stuck. Yeah, okay, they removed those charges prior to his trial, but they had basically 11 months of it being paraded around in the news. So everybody, so many people probably thought it was true, and that goes against it. Well, right, and that goes against our right as a citizen. When you get accused and arrested on charges, somebody or whatever it is, you have that right to confront your whatever it is in court.
Just out of just for the viewers, especially for people that are listening that are just coming in, you raised a good point, Jay Jacks, when you said that they dropped the charges on Stephen in terms of your the sex and torture and all that. Do you want to just quickly from what we know from the hearings, why they dropped it, just so everyone can make sure that they're on the same page of why? Because there's obviously you see new people come into this case all the time, and that's something that I keep seeing get asked on like Ma'am Gossip and Reddit. They're all like, why did Stephen get all those charges dropped, yet they still went along with Brendan Dassey and it's just his word? So do you want to maybe, just because you've read all the trial transcripts and stuff, just say on the basis of what we know why they dropped the additional charges of Stephen?
Well, because it's the right of against self-incrimination. So that's really what it comes down to. There are other reasons as well. So,
well, they didn't have any. So without Brendan's testimony in Stephen's trial,
correct.
There was no evidence of a sexual assault that they could use.
Correct.
So it was purely those charges were purely brought on because of Brendan's confession.
The part that gets me absolutely insane about the whole Brendan Dassey prosecution is Stephen Avery was already convicted at that point. They didn't need to make a full court press on Brendan Dassey. Technically they'd already got their guy. You know what I mean? They'd already got their main guy, and they didn't need to go full court press. And that's the iPad smashing moment for me when I realized that. I'm like, even after Stephen's already convicted and waiting for sentencing a week later, you're like, you already won and you're gonna ruin this kid's life, when you had the opportunity to say, we don't need to move forward with the murder charge. He's already really the main focus of that. He was, a cleanup guy or whatever, and they went full court press. And I think that's the part that inflames me harder than some of just the statements that are made. It's just the fact that they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to go to those lengths.
But but the state had a big problem with Brendan, and that is, what were they going to do with him? Right? They couldn't let him go. Right? They couldn't let him walk.
That's right.
Because if he actually walked, he would be hounded by the press for a start, and then say, hey, look, I made the whole thing up. Right? The investigators, they coerced me. I just told them what they wanted, blah, blah, blah. That scenario never happened. I was there with Uncle Stephen. We just did a little fire and I went home. So in other words, guys, Brendan is Stephen's alibi. They can't let the alibi walk free. So they've got to put a muzzle on him and say, all right, you confessed to having done all these things to Teresa Halbach. The jury found him guilty, including guilty of mutilation of a corpse. Now, how do you work that one out, guys? Stephen Avery was acquitted of that charge, yet Brendan Dassey was convicted of that charge. It boggles the mind.
It's unbelievable. I don't recall him actually confessing to that. I recall the picture he drew of the body of the fire was not dismembered.
The body was whole. Correct. The body was whole. And look, the investigators, they're not stupid. They read Eisenberg's report and they're going, uh-oh, some of these bones have evidence of cut marks, saw marks in them. And those bone fragments were burnt. Right, Jack? They were burnt to the same degree as the other cremains. So therefore, Teresa Halbach had suffered some form of dismemberment. Well, when they questioned Brendan Dassey, They said to him, "What did you do?" "Well, I picked up the feet and Stephen picked up the shoulders and we put her in there whole." So how do you go from putting a human being whole in a fire to then end up with cut saw marks in some of the bones? Guys, you know what Brendan said is complete garbage. It didn't happen that way.
No.
Poor Teresa Halbach somewhere got cut to pieces and then cremated. It wasn't on the salvage yard and it wasn't in the burn pit.
No, there's just no way. And they knew it. And so they had to craft that story.
I'm going to ask a question to the panel in the chat. I'm rewinding it a little bit, and I don't even know if this is probably a point in conversation to even bring it up, but because we addressed it finally before, I just want to kind of incorporate it in. I know that there's a difference between, obviously, you know, post-conviction, Kathleen's trying to introduce Denny, and with Denny, like Big Jeff says, you have to have the three prongs: motive, opportunity, and is it means? What is it? Direct connection. So
means motive and opportunity.
Yeah. So the only thing that I kind of want to ask you, or this is a question, I'm not even sure I even have an opinion of it, and I don't even know if I even understand it myself. But do you think that this is where the state or the judge itself could overlook it against Kathleen for the fact that what we just said? They dropped charges of like sex allegations, rape, all those against Stephen Avery because there was no substantial evidence that proved that was part of Stephen's narrative. So they had to let it go. Yet Kathleen is using that motive for Bobby. So if they could turn around and go, hey, you're using a motive that we couldn't even use because we got backed into a corner because there is no forensic evidence that we could even have done it against Stephen, yet you are now able to say that you're using it against another person, the Denny, with no forensic evidence. You're just the definition of motive for Denny for Bobby is of definite circumstances based on computer searches. That is it. So my question to you all is, do you think that is something that we might see, that they might address that and go, hang on, you're using a motive on something that we couldn't even prove, that we couldn't even prove, that we had to let it go. So you can't have what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If it's not good enough for us to have used it, why are you using it here with no forensic backing up of it? Could that be why she loses the Denny claim? Because the motive, she's presented a motive, but the motive isn't strong because the motive has already been explored and was basically.
She did cite a case, though. The thing I hear she cited a case. She cited a case, that she views as similar, and I recall reading it in the briefing, the most recent filing, where similar porn-related activity was used to justify a motive. So she has a legal basis.
Stevie Wilson, or no?
I'm not going to remember it, like that. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, we could look it up. We could look it up in the file. But you're right. I mean, we don't know. Judge Angie is going to, pull something out of her stinky ass to, deny this or delay this. What it is, whether it actually has a legal foundation, that remains to be seen. Do I think there's a real reason? I mean, again, my standard, as Jack likes to point out, is, what would a reasonable person think? And to me, a reasonable person would think that that there's a possibility that this could lead to that. Do I think it really happened? No, I don't think it really happened. Do I think he meets the prong of Denny? Do I think Stephen's been given the screw job of all times? I do. So therefore, do I care about Bobby being accused of this Denny violation, which is not going to lead to an arrest? Anybody who thinks that this is going to lead to arrest needs to think again, because it's not. There's not a single lick of forensic evidence against Bobby. It's all about getting Stephen a new trial, and that's it.
think we should address that. I kind of addressed it last week in another part of it when I said about Bobby might want to work with Kathleen, but Kathleen might not want to work with Bobby anymore because it would ultimately hurt her motion as it stands right now. It's up to the prosecution to file charges. Kathleen can't do a thing. At best, she can do maybe a recommendation by saying he cooperated and this is what happened. But in terms of an actual charge against Bobby, Kathleen has absolutely nothing to do with it. It all falls on the state prosecution if they can come up with a charge of their own. And I agree with you, Big Jeff. I don't think that we'll ever see anyone, unless it's overwhelming forensic evidence that contradict it being Stephen, anyone will be charged for this.
It's a lot that the real killer is long gone.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with you both.
I just wanted to say, you know, the way the state handled the case initially is it was up to them. They could have easily included Brendan Dassey into the narrative, but they chose not to. And you're correct. When you've got a pile of cremains, you're not going to be able to prove sexual assault. And their own crime scene investigation team proved that Teresa Halbach was never pinned up in that bed, right? There was no forensic evidence to prove that. So all the things, the narrative that Brendan said that occurred to Teresa could not be proven at all. In fact, it couldn't even be proven for himself. There was no forensic evidence that Teresa was ever in that trailer. There is no forensic evidence of a sexual assault, nothing. So hence, he's in prison because he admitted doing those crimes. Even though he recanted, unfortunately, it went against him. So, you know, it's a very, very difficult situation. So Kratz knew that if he included Brendan into the narrative, it would have been a shit show of monumental proportions. So he left them out, right?
And that is a really good question. And I started asking that a while back. Kratz knew, they all knew that Brendan said he was over there that night. So why wasn't he included from the beginning?
Correct, because we know Brendan's story could have been ripped apart easily. A competent defense attorney would have spent, hell, you and I could have spent 10 minutes ripping apart his testimony completely.
Destroyed.
And in
Destroyed
fact, what did Brendan Dassey tell Fallon where he got this narrative from? Kiss the Girls. The movie Kiss the Girls. I did a presentation on this. What Brendan told them, the major points of what happened is exactly what's in the film. He even pointed it out to Fallon. No one checked it. No one checked the veracity of his story, his narrative. It's all there. So they knew if they included Brendan, it was going to be a mountain that they had to climb because a competent defense attorney would have ripped it apart. As soon as you rip the narrative apart, you then make Stephen's case against him much weaker because the question will be, hey, wait a minute. If the star witness can't get his story straight and he was meant to be there, then what the hell are we doing again, trying to come up with a case against Stephen? It makes no sense. When you factor in the forensic, the destruction of the state's narrative by Kathleen Zellner, you now weaken the entire narrative from the ground up. Kratz knew this, didn't want to take the chance.
Well, I don't want to take the chance of this episode running away from us, so I got to jump in right here. And
left the station now.
But anyway, thanks to everybody out there in chat who has been right along there with us. But I think it is that time of the episode where we do throw it to our main man, Big Jeff.
Well, I hope that the audience and the people in the chat can see the frame that's up right now, because this frame really does tell the story of the Wiegert and Fassbender interrogation of Brendan. I'm sure you can flash it. With Wiegert putting his hands almost in a pedophilic kind of way on Brendan's knee and saying, "It's okay. We're going to help you through this, right?" This is going to be the million and first lie, and this particular lie is the one that succeeds in putting Brendan at ease to take that path out and really ruin the rest of Stephen Avery and his own life. And it makes me so mad that I want to get on a plane to Australia, drive to Silkman's house, smash his iPad, then drive to Kelly's house and leave the remains in her mailbox, and then go to cast for a bottle of wine. That's how mad
Be careful.
So
you might get a terrorist
Good Lord.
threatening fine there, Big Jeff.
That's not terrorism, because Dr. Silkman will lend me his iPad for my stress relief. That's the kind of guy he is.
You gotta let it go. What do you say about that, Dr. Silkman? Throw it.
Well,
iPad is this?
I just want to.
System.
Yes, I just want to put an SOS out there. I need to know of a good iPad repair center because I've cracked mine, I think, about 10 times now. I know that Jack's about to throw his, but all jokes aside, guys, I hope in chat you can clearly feel and see our passion especially for what was done to Brendan Dassey. We all feel very upset, disgusted, and we can see it being played out in real time when we're watching this particular episode. And I'm afraid to say it's just going to get worse, but I've really enjoyed this episode so far. It's amazing. You can watch the episode many, many times. You always pick up new things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman. And Jack.
We've been around the bend, with these guys and what they did. This narrative that was, really built around Brendan, not bringing him along from day, no later than November 9th when they arrested Stephen. Well, you were there too. You were arrested as well. You guys did it together, and they didn't do that. And then moving forward and all that, the blood. It's such really, we talked about that in the last episode. It's such an interesting thing of how we think that it worked, how real life really happened, the mechanical part of it, breaking that down, and what they said. Stood not up. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I've got.
Absolutely, Jack. Thank you. And Kel, before we go on to the next.
Before Silkman sent out his SOS for his iPad, I was going to ask. The question was, how many bloody iPads you got? You must be going through hundreds of them. But all bullshit aside, again, as we're going through Making a Murderer 2, it's just getting more and more obvious the outcome of where Kathleen was going in terms of what she was originally finding in her results. I know it kind of has differed from what we're seeing now. Again, I think we'll address that more as we come closer to it. It's gone more strategic now versus, I think, what she's learned along the way, and she's just trying to learn to adapt that to where we're at. Again, this is us in hindsight now from watching this to where we're at. Excellent discussion from you, gentlemen. You guys always have me thinking. I always, I try to bounce off what you guys are putting forward, and it makes my head tick, and that's what brings me out to ask the random questions, because while you guys are talking, it just is keeping me going. And the chat, thanks everyone for always joining. We see that everyone joins along with us, adds their value. Appreciate everyone's. And yeah, just on to the next, and let's hope between every episode we do, there's a movement, and the outcome is what we all want, and that's Stephen and Brennan to be free.
Thank you very much, Kel, for those comments. And as our motto has quickly become standardized, we'll be on to the next week, and that's it for this episode of Discussing Murder. So for Dr. Silkman and Big Jeff and Kel and Jack, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murder.